Hi guys, I've got some really cool wines to share with you today. We're essentially going to Bordeaux. I've got a couple of left bank and one right bank to show you. But before we get into that, Bordeaux is a region over in France, and when we're talking about investment grade wine particularly, I'm quite often talking about the 1855 Bordeaux classification, which basically means in 1855 they said these are the best wines. But the 1855 classification actually only applies to the left bank. So you've probably heard that we talk very much about left and right bank when it comes to Bordeaux. So essentially it's really just there's a river that runs down the middle and we're talking about wines on the left side of that river or the right side, hence left bank, right bank. The right bank is actually Saint-Émilion and Pomerol. But Pomerol, you've probably heard of Petrus, and they've pretty much all just agreed that that is the best wine. So there's no point in having a formal classification system. So on the right bank, there's actually the Saint-Émilion classification system, and it's really just split into two tiers. So you've got your Grand Cru Class A, which are the best, or Class B, which are just one down from the best. And on the left bank, with that 1855 Bordeaux classification, there's actually 5 tiers. And you've probably heard of first growth, second growth, all the way down to fifth growth, and that is essentially the tiered structure. But in all of Bordeaux, yield, so the amount of wine that they can produce every year, is tightly controlled. So what that essentially means, particularly when we're talking about investment grade wine, is you've got demand and supply. So if supply is always tightly controlled, and as people start drinking that wine over time, the gap between demand and supply is essentially growing. And that's pretty much what investment grade wine is all about. So I would love to share a couple of my favorites from the left bank and one from the right bank. So both are actually Bordeaux blends. So what is the difference? The left bank is actually a Cabernet-forward Bordeaux blend. So you generally have Cabernet, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and sometimes other components in the blend. You'll have Cab Franc generally, sometimes Carmenère. Occasionally you'll have Malbec as well, but generally it's Cab Sav, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, and Merlot. And your left bank is always a Cabernet forward, so Cab Sav forward blend. So it's the predominant varietal in the blend, versus a right bank where the predominant varietal is actually Merlot. So when we're also thinking about left bank, right bank, we're talking about Cabernet forward versus Merlot forward. So Cabernet forward blends, we have 2 of my favorites. This is a Château Lafite Rothschild, and it is just such a cool wine. I also just love the original wooden cases, and particularly when we're talking about investment grade wine, it is a collectible, right? So when you have an original wooden case and you're able to have the wine in basically the condition that it came in from new, that is essentially going to be worth more than if you have a collectible that doesn't have the original wooden case and isn't in the best condition. So if you think about other collectibles, we're looking for things that are in mint condition, right? And the original wooden case is part of that mint condition that we're looking for. This is just such a cool wine, and the detail on the label, like, it's just beautiful. This is a 2019. And yeah, I think in terms of investment grade wine, like it's definitely one that's hard to go past. Obviously, fantastic reputation. There's actually so much demand, particularly around Asia, that Lafite has actually bought vineyards over in China, and they essentially have very similar climate actually to Bordeaux because of the latitude, or is it longitude, whichever one of those it is. Geography is not my strong suit, but essentially it runs along the same line, so the climate is actually very similar. So second one that I really love from Bordeaux is Château Gruaud Larose. My pronunciation is probably shocking, but this is actually a second growth. So the Château Lafite Lafite is a first growth, so very top tier, the best that you can get essentially in that classification system. The Gruaud Larose is a second growth, so it's one down, but it is such a beautiful wine. When I went over to Bordeaux, it was really cool to be able to actually go into the private cellars of these vineyards and see wines that were, you know, created in or made in 1855 when the classification system first came into play. So that was such a cool experience. And I love doing vertical tastings because you get to actually see how the wine develops over time. And this one is a 2005, but it's such a beautiful wine. I think if I had to compare it with something similar in Australia, I would say this one is very much has that beautiful finesse and polish. I mean, they both do, that you would get with something like a Grange or a Hill of Grace. It's just so beautiful and well done, and you can see it evolve. And it was quite interesting as well being able to do the comparison, because when you jump over to you know, other estates like Pichon-Baron, you can actually see, you know, the difference in how different parts of the left bank will evolve and develop over time. So I found with Gruaud Larose, the similar vintage that we tried between them and Pichon-Baron, you had a wine in Gruaud Larose that had really integrated so beautifully, whereas the Pichon-Baron was still beautiful as a wine, but it was almost like you could taste the components separately. That's the only way that I can kind of describe it. But over time, those components essentially come together. And some wines that you'll try will have those components really well integrated from the start, and they evolve. And some of them you can see that they've got all of the elements there. And as the wine ages, it will come together almost like seeing a puzzle piece where you've got, or a puzzle where you've got all the pieces there, but you're just waiting for it to kind of come together and come into sync. So that's what I love about trying wines, particularly doing vertical tastings. So Cabernet-forward, both of these, and the left bank is predominantly, as I said, Cabernet-forward, but the reason being is the soil is predominantly gravel, and Cabernet is actually a late ripening variety. So when we have gravel, it means that we're able to drain the water quite well, because Cabernet doesn't necessarily need a lot of water. It does really well in warm climates for that reason. But also the gravel enables us to keep the heat in the soil, and it also reflects back the sun onto the grape. So that helps to lengthen that ripening period. And being a late ripening variety, we obviously want to lengthen that period so that we can fully ripen the grape. So that's actually why the left bank is predominantly Cabernet-forward blends, because of the gravel. And the right bank, so this is one of my favorites. This is a Château Figeac, and this is actually a wine that has stepped up from a Grand Cru Class B to a Class A, and it's such a beautiful wine. I mean, they all are, right? Like these, we're talking about some of the best wines in the world. But Merlot-forward, and the reason being is predominantly on the right side of the bank, so the right bank, we have predominantly clay as the soil type. So Merlot is actually a varietal that is widely planted on that side, and that varietal loves a lot of water. So clay, essentially, unlike gravel, which drains a lot of the water, clay actually retains a lot of that water. So that's something that Merlot loves, and that's why we have Merlot-forward blends. But they're just all fantastic wines, and I really just love the label on all of them. But yeah, I love the Château Figeac. I think it's a really cool label. But yeah, all fantastic wines. There are all the way down to fifth growth on the left bank. There's obviously the two classes, as I mentioned, on the right bank, and they're fantastic wines. When you have those wines from the 1855 classification, so those 1 to 5th growth, and the Saint-Émilion classification as well. These are all investment grade wines. They have a great built to age structure. Some of them can last for 50 plus years. Like, they're just some of the best wines. And if you get over there and can do a vertical tasting, it is absolutely well worth it to see how these wines actually develop over time. Cheers.